Hi, my name's Karen Kolbe, and I'm coming to you today as Mother Goose. I really like to read, and Feathers, my friend, likes to be read too. I hope you like to be read to also. The story that I'm going to read today is called Dumbo, and as you can see from the picture, Dumbo is an elephant. Let's see what Dumbo's doing. It was spring in the circus. After a long winter's rest, it was time to set out again on the open road. Toot, toot, whistled Casey Jones, the locomotive of the circus train. All aboard, shouted the ringmaster. The acrobats, the jugglers, tumblers, the snake charmers, everyone scrambled to their places on the train. The keepers locked the animal cages. Then with a jiggity jerk and a brisk puff puff, off sped Casey Jones. The circus was on its way. Everyone was singing. Everyone was happy. The animal mothers were all singing lullabies to their baby animals. Proudest of all was Mrs. Jumbo, for in her stall was a chubby, brand new baby elephant. Oh, my. What a darling, cried the 4 elephants in the next stall, standing up on their hind legs to look over the divider. Just arrived this minute, beamed Mrs. Jumbo, stroking the little fella's head with her trunk. The baby elephant started to sneeze. He wrinkled up his big little nose. He blinked his eyes. Ka-choo! His head jerked back, and his ears flapped forward. Such ears! They opened out, unfolding and unfolding, until they stretched out 5 times bigger than his head. The elephants in the other pen looked at each other and snickered. That baby'll never grow up to be handsome and dignified like us. He's only a ridiculous clown. Little Jumbo, giggled one. Little Dumbo, that should be his name. Dumbo, that's a good one. The others laughed. Sobbing, little Dumbo toddled toward his mother. Tenderly, Mrs. Jumbo picked him up, wrapped his ears around him, and rocked him to sleep in her trunk. All night while the baby animals slept, Casey Jones whistled and puffed, hauling the long train to the city where the circus was to open its show. It was dark when they pulled into the station. Rain poured down hard, but the circus began to unload. The roustabouts jumped down from the freight cars and lighted torches and stuck them in the ground. Boink! The cage doors rattled open. Runways clanked down. Men and animals came bustling out of the train into the wet, windy night. Horses pulled the wagons out into the open lot. Camels carried huge tent canvases, and elephants lugged the tall tent poles. Mrs. Jumbo worked with the others, and her baby helped a little. By morning, the rain had stopped. The tent was all set up, and the circus was busy getting ready for the big parade. The band played, everyone fell into line, then off they pranced, a gay procession down the main street. There were creamy white horses, licorice-colored seals. There were lady acrobats in pink tights, lions pacing in their gilded cages, and elephants marching with slow, even steps. The crowds on the sidewalk cheered. Then suddenly their eyes opened wide. They craned their necks. Look! Look! They cried. Look at that silly animal with the draggy ears. He can't be an animal. He must be a clown. They burst out laughing. Sadly, Dumbo toddled behind his mother, with his trunk clasped to her tail. He tried to hurry along faster so he wouldn't hear the laughter, but he stumbled. He tripped over his ears. Down he splashed into a puddle of mud. Now the crowds laughed even louder. Mrs. Jumbo scowled at them. She picked Dumbo up and carried him in her trunk the rest of the way. When the parade finally came back to the tent, everyone hustled to get ready for the afternoon show. Mrs. Jumbo put Dumbo in her wooden bathtub, and as she scrubbed, she whispered comforting words. "Never mind what anyone says about you, Dumbo dear. Someday you'll be the most famous of us all." Outside, the crowds were already streaming into the circus grounds. "See the animals first," shouted the man behind the ticket stand. "Plenty of time before the show starts." A gang of noisy boys came pushing in first. "We want to see the elephant," they yelled, "the one with the sailboat ears." They came charging straight toward Mrs. Jumbo's stall. "Look, there he is." A boy reached in beyond the stall rope, where visitors were not allowed to go. He grabbed one of Dumbo's ears and pulled it hard. Then he made an ugly face and stuck out his tongue. Mrs. Jumbo couldn't stand it. She snatched the boy up with her trunk and dropped him on the other side of the rope and spanked him hard. "Help!" he cried. "Help! Help!" The other boys screamed. Mrs. Jumbo seized a bucket of water and splashed them from head to foot. "Wild elephants!" somebody shouted. "Run for your life!" And everyone dashed for the doors in a panic. "What's going on here?" cried the ringmaster, rushing forward with his whip. He snapped it at Mrs. Jumbo. "Tie her down," he yelled to his men. Mrs. Jumbo reared up on her hind legs, but it was no use. They tied her up. They chained her down. So she was behind the bars in a prison wagon with a big sign that said, "Danger, mad elephant, keep out." The next day, they made Dumbo into a clown. They painted his face with a foolish grin, dressed him in a baby dress. On his head, they put a bonnet. They used him in the most ridiculous act in the show, a make-believe fire. Every night he had to jump from the top of a blazing cardboard house down into a fireman's net. The audience thought it was a great joke to see an elephant in a pink nightgown come tumbling down through the smoke. But Dumbo felt disgraced. That night in the elephant tent, the big animals were talking about Dumbo. "He's a disgrace," they agreed, "and not just to his mother, but to all elephants. He's a disgrace to us." Hidden in the pile of hay, Timothy Mouse, the smallest animal in the circus, listened and wondered who this Dumbo was and what he had done that was so shocking. As Timothy wondered, Dumbo himself came into the tent. He smiled shyly at the big elephants, for he was lonely without his mother. But when they saw him, they stopped talking at once and turned their backs on him. The smile faded from Dumbo's face, and tears came to his eyes, and he turned slowly away. Timothy saw the whole thing. "They can't treat the little fellow that way," he muttered, "not while Timothy Mouse is around." He brushed off his little red jacket, set his red bandmaster's cap at a jaunty angle, and he followed Dumbo. "Hey there, little fellow," he called as Dumbo disappeared behind a bale of hay. Dumbo burrowed into the hay and shook with fright. "Don't be afraid," said Timothy. "Come on out. I'm your friend. I want to help you." Shyly, Dumbo poked out his trunk. Timothy jumped onto it and ran up toward Dumbo's ear. "Don't worry, Dumbo. I'll figure something out. We'll get your mother out of jail, you and I together, and we'll make you the star of the show. You'll be flying high." Dumbo's eyes were sparkling now, and he flapped his ears hopefully. "Say," said Timothy thoughtfully, staring at the ears, "maybe that's not such a bad idea. Flying high. Those ears are as good as wings. I'll teach you how to fly." Dumbo tottered to his feet and smiled at Timothy. "That's better," Timothy grinned back. "Come on, let's go for a walk and see if we can find a place to practice." Quietly, Dumbo crept out of the tent with Timothy riding on the brim of his cap. At the edge of the circus lot stood the prison car where Dumbo's mother now spent her lonely days and nights. "Say, how would you like to visit your mother?" Timothy suggested. Dumbo just sighed sadly. "We can do it," Timothy told him. "Just turn here." With Timothy leading, they soon found their way between the tents and past the wagons until they came to the prison car on a siding. At Dumbo's soft call out, his mother showed up. She put her trunk through the bars. Dumbo told her all about the clown act and how unhappy he was without her, and about the wonderful idea Timothy had for making him a success. Mrs. Jumbo listened sympathetically, stroking him gently with her trunk. "Don't you worry, baby," she told him. "You're having a hard time now, and I'm sorry I can't be with you to help, but just remember, always do your best. And as Timothy said, you'll soon be flying high." Dumbo smiled and gulped down a sob that had been choking its way up his throat. "I'll try," he promised. Then sadly they said goodnight, and Timothy and Dumbo continued on their way. Out on the bare fields in the starlight, they went to work. With Timothy as a teacher, Dumbo practiced running and jumping and hopping. He tried slow and fast takeoffs, and standing and running jumps. He stretched out his wings and flapped them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he tried the whole thing together. But try as hard as he might, Dumbo could not leave the ground. At last, almost too tired to stand, the two friends gave up and started gloomily back toward the sleeping circus. "Don't worry, Dumbo," Timothy whispered, as he curled up on Dumbo's hat brim for a good night's sleep. "I'll have you flying yet." So Dumbo fell asleep with a tired smile on his face and a beautiful dream in his heart. In the dream, he was flying as easily and gracefully as a bird, soaring up through the air, high above the circus. It was a wonderful dream, and it seemed very real to Dumbo. When the morning sun arose, Timothy was the first to awaken. He blinked, and he looked up. Just above him were 4 old black crows. They were sitting there staring at him. Why, yawned Timothy, rubbing his eyes. "Where am I?" "You're up in our tree," snapped the crows crossly. "That's where you are." "Tree?" gasped Timothy. He looked around. Sure enough, there he was, sitting on a branch. He and Dumbo were up in a tree. The ground was far, far below. But how did we get here?" he stammered. "How?" cackled the crow. "You and that elephant just came flying up." "Flying?" Timothy yelled. "Dumbo! Dumbo, wake up! Dumbo, we're up in a tree. You flew here." Slowly, Dumbo opened his eyes. He glanced down. He gulped. Then he struggled to his feet. But suddenly he slipped on the smooth tree bark and he fell. Down, down, down. He bounced from branch to branch with Timothy clinging to his trunk. Plonk! They landed in a shallow pond just underneath the tree. The crows chuckled and cawed from above. Timothy scrambled out of the water and wrung out Dumbo's tail. "Dumbo, you can fly. You can fly when you're asleep, and if you can fly when you're asleep, you can fly when you're awake. Your ears, Dumbo, they're your fortune." He grabbed one of Dumbo's wet ears and patted it. "You won't be a clown anymore. You'll be famous, the only flying elephant in the whole wide world." And Timothy and Dumbo began all over to practice flying. But it wasn't easy. Time after time, Dumbo tried to take off, and time after time he sprawled out flat on his face. Soon the crows began to feel sorry for the little fella. When Dumbo told them all the sad things that had happened to Dumbo because of his big ears, they flew down and they offered to help him. One of the crows took Timothy aside and said, "Flying's like swimming," he whispered. "It's just a matter of believing you can do it." He turned and snatched a long black feather from his tail. "Here, take this. Tell the baby elephant it's a magic feather. Tell him if he holds it, he can fly." The boss crow winked and flew off. Timothy handed Dumbo the feather and scurried up his trunk to the brim of his hat. He held his breath. The trick worked like a charm. The very instant that Dumbo wrapped the tip of his trunk around the feather, flap, flap, flap went his ears. Up into the air he soared just like a bird. Over the tallest treetops he sailed. He glided, he dipped, he dived. 3 times he circled over the heads of a cheering crowd, and then he headed back to the circus grounds. Timothy was so excited he could hardly keep his seat. "Land before you get to the tent," he shouted. "We must keep your flying a secret, a surprise for your act in this afternoon's show." No one noticed Dumbo when he and Timothy came quietly back. It was already time for Dumbo to get into his costume. The clowns powdered him white and put him into a baby nightgown, and then they led him off as they always did to the far end of the circus ring. There, inside the walls of the cardboard house, he had to wait all through the show until the fire crackled up around him. Slowly, the tent began to fill with people. The band began to play. Snap, snapped the ringmaster's whip. The ponies did their dancing act. The lions climbed on tables and pedestals. Breathlessly, Dumbo waited. At last, Timothy leaned down and handed him the feather. "In just a second, Dumbo," he whispered. "You'll be the most famous animal in the whole world." Crack, crack, crackled the fire. The clown act was on. Flames shot up around the cardboard house. Clang, 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 roared the clown fire engine, rushing toward the blaze. From the far end of the ring, a red-headed mother clown came running. "Save my baby!" she screamed. "He's on the top floor." The fireman brought a big net and held it out. "Jump, my darling baby, jump!" shrieked the mother clown. Dumbo jumped, but as he jumped, the black feather slipped from his trunk and floated away. Now his magic was gone, and Dumbo plunged down like a stone. Timothy saw the feather go, and he knew what that meant to Dumbo. "You can fly," he shouted frantically. "The feather is a fake. You can fly." Dumbo heard the shout and doubtfully spread his ears wide. Not 2 feet above the net, he stopped in his plunge and swooped up into the air. A mighty gasp arose from the audience. They knew it couldn't be, but it was. Dumbo was flying. While the crowd roared in delight, Dumbo did power dives, loops, spins, and barrel rolls. He swooped down to pick up peanuts and squirted a trunk full of water on the clowns. The keepers freed Mrs. Jumbo and brought her to the tent in triumph to see her baby fly. So all of Dumbo's worries had come to an end. By the time the afternoon show was over, news of the flying elephant had spread throughout the city. By evening, Dumbo was a hero from coast to coast. Timothy became Dumbo's manager, and he saw to it that Dumbo got a wonderful contract with a big salary and a pension for his mother. The circus was renamed Dumbo's Flying Circus, and Dumbo traveled in a special streamlined car. But best of all, he forgave everyone who had ever been unkind to him, for his heart was as big as his magical ears. So even though some people were mad at him and made fun of him and didn't like him, he forgave them. And it says his heart was as big as his ears. And we know how big those were. Anyway, this is the Dumbo story. I hope you liked it.